to find a reason, to find faith and peace of mind. When one too many beliefs die, it's tough to see through these black eyes.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Fantrax and Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and as always, you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball, on Instagram at redrock_bball, and facebook.com/redrockbasketball. We are here to talk about the action that went down on Sunday. We're going to do a preview of Monday's two games as well. So,
let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. And I think we might start off proceedings just by going through the perfect DFS lineups for Sunday's action. Then we'll go do a review of Sunday's games, game by game, and then move into a preview of Monday's action. For the perfect DFS lineup, on FanDuel, Johnny Wall had 56.8. He was always in a pretty decent spot there against Atlanta. Pat Bev at 39.5. That was a little bit out of the blue for Beverly. CJ McCollum went off. He was at a great price, and he obviously returned heaps of value, 52.1. Well, Jimmy Harden, he got the best of the big dollar guys against Russell Westbrook, 62.9 for Jim. Evan Turner, the surprise starter for Portland, had 31. Andre Robertson had 35.9 in a huge game where he couldn't miss threes, basically. Draymond Green, 61.9. Bob Portis, 38.3. And Al Horford had 37.4 for a total of 415.8, and that cost $59,600. On DraftKings, it was Wall at 61, McCollum at 56.5, Robertson 39.25, Markieff Morris in his playoff debut 42.75, Draymond at 66, Isaiah Thomas at 48.75, Portis at 40.25, and Beverly at 44.5 for a total of $399, and that cost $49,800. You know what? I'm going to tell you about today's sponsor right now, because that is SeatGeek. You know about SeatGeek, and if you don't, you should, because SeatGeek is the easiest way for you to go ahead and find tickets to any sporting event or concert that you want to go and see. Buying tickets online for these sort of events in the past has been a painful and confusing process, but not anymore, because SeatGeek has not only made it easier, it's made it more economical for you to go and find the best tickets to the events that you want to go and see. SeatGeek has come along, they've created this amazing app and website to help you get the tickets for the events that you want to go to. It's the first place that I go to find tickets to any event that I'm interested in going to, and as I said, I'm hopefully going to be heading over to the US in July and looking for some San Francisco Giants tickets. I'll be getting them through SeatGeek and getting myself that $20 rebate off my first purchase. SeatGeek does all the price comparison for you guys. They search multiple ticket sites and find the best deal for you. It saves you time and it saves you money, and you get the most bang for your buck as well, because SeatGeek rates every single ticket on their site in terms of value, and it grades them. It tells you this is a good value ticket. It puts it up in green. This is a bad value ticket. It puts it up in red. So it's very simple for you to look at it and go, I don't know if I want this one, but this deal over here, that looks fantastic. Thank you, SeatGeek. In order to get yourself a $20 rebate, which is probably the best part of all this, all listeners to this podcast get a $20 rebate on their first ticket purchase. To get that rebate, download the SeatGeek app onto your smartphone, go to the settings tab and click add a promo code. Enter that promo code, which is of course LOFantasy. So enter that code LOFantasy, and SeatGeek will send you $20 after you've purchased your first tickets. Download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code LOFantasy today. All right, let's talk about these games that went down on Sunday. We had a full playoff slate of games on deck. We had the four of them, the remainder of the game ones from the first round of the playoffs. We started off with the early game, and that was Atlanta and Washington gets the victory there in the end, 114 to 107. I tell you what I've noticed through these first games of the playoffs is that coaches aren't shortening their rotations. Normally we see in the playoffs that coaches, well, in the regular season, they'll play 10 guys, they'll play 11 guys, and in the playoffs it goes to 8 or 9. We're not seeing that in the playoffs. We're seeing coaches stick with 10 guys, go to 11 guys, and guys who honestly should not see the floor at all are getting minutes, and there was definitely some weird rotational decisions throughout these games. The first one of those was in Atlanta. I didn't think there's any way that we would have seen Jose Calderon play because he just can't keep up on either end of the court. But he got 8 minutes. Weirdly, Thabo Sefolosha, not in the rotation at all. He's the 11th guy in the rotation, according to Mike Budenholzer. So we had Calderon and we had Mike Dunleavy play ahead of Thabo, which is absolutely nonsensical to me. And weirdly enough, it's not the strangest rotational decision of the entire day. Dennis Schroeder had 36 minutes. He was decent. Shot 50%, had 25, 3 and 9. They should be giving him 38, 39 minutes. The alternatives are Jose Calderon and Malcolm Delaney. Or you run Tim Hardaway or Kent Bazemore at backup point guard, which is what they should be doing over Jose there anyway. They went with the starting wing combination of Hardaway and Taurean Prince. Hardaway didn't have the best night. In just 28 minutes, he was only 2 of 11 for 7 points, but he still got those 7 rebounds. So he does have these extra strings to his bow, which he never really had when he arrived in Atlanta or in his seasons in New York, his 2 years in New York. He didn't have that extra ability, but now he does. So even if it's a horrific shooting night, which it was, he can still put up fantasy points and value in other areas. Taurean Prince, as a rookie, played 32 minutes and had 14 and 6. I don't think there's any reason for Budenholzer to change that lineup and to give Bazemore more minutes or to give Thabo more minutes or to give Thabo any minutes or to give Dunleavy this role. He won't necessarily play 32 each night because he probably won't be a 55% shooter scoring 14 points each night. But he's not going to be a token starter. He's not going to be a Thon McCurr that plays 12 minutes. He's going to be in the mix for big chunks of this playing time moving forward. Paulie Millsap, 19 points, but didn't do really much of anything else. Only had the 2 rebounds. It wasn't a great Millsap night. And weirdly, we saw a huge rotation. We had Ersan Ilyasova played 20 minutes. Mike Muscala played 13 minutes. And this is weird to me that Muscala was out of the rotation when Ilyasova arrived. He re-entered the rotation only when Paul Millsap got injured. But then in the playoffs, you actually keep him in. So you're playing Howard, Millsap, Muscala, and Ilyasova as a 4 big rotation. Really just keeping it very spread out. And I'm not sure how long it sticks, but it's been a very constant theme throughout the entirety of the playoffs with only one team, and that's Mike D'Antoni and the Rockets, going with a tight, short 8-man rotation. And even his wasn't an 8-man rotation because at the end it was a massive blowout and they put in guys like Bobby Brown. But for the part of the game that mattered, they played these guys big minutes. Kent Bazemore was alright, 12, 3 and 3, but he's going to have a limited role, I think, just because of these other guys around and the preference of Hardaway and Prince over him. For the Wizards, Johnny Wall was fantastic, 32, 4 and 14, as was Markieff Morris, who was always in a pretty decent spot to succeed, I think, here against Atlanta, and he showed that. He played 38, he had 21 and 7 with a steal, 4 blocks and 2 triples, and something I always talk about when looking at performances, did it come on ridiculous shooting? No, he shot 42% and still contributed in those other areas and still got the big minutes he plays. With Yanmi Hinmi out, you're going to be seeing Markieff at the 5 a lot, and that's going to boost what he can do, as it's going to boost what Marcin Gortat can do, who played 31 minutes and had 14 and 10. So that's a theme that's going to continue for this team. We're going to see big minutes for Gortat. Beal had 22 with 3 assists and 3 steals in his 39. And the Kelly Oubre Otto Porter dynamic completely reversed course, which is, again, it's weird to me that you would run the last 3-4 weeks of the season playing Oubre basically more minutes than Porter every single game, and then you get to the playoffs and you just flip it back and you give Porter 32 minutes and you give Oubre 19, which is fine because Porter's the better player, but the fact that you ran the end of the season just not giving Porter anything, unless it's just a resting thing, let's see what Oubre can do, but it was a very prolonged period of doing that and then just reverse course completely. So Oubre only saw the 19 minutes here, and Bojan Bogdanovic only got 14 and Jason Smith only got 15. So it was, concentrated minutes between Wall, Morris, Beal, Gortat and Porter. All 5 of those starters got over 30 minutes. Portland and Golden State, a game that was actually, before I get, Dan Reeves says, I don't know why the Hawks love Delaney so much. They don't, Dan. They don't love him at all. They played Jose Calderon over him. So I think it's fair to say they don't like him at all at this point. They played him at the start. They had no other point guards, but they don't play him anymore. They've moved him to the 3rd point guard, which to me is a mistake because Calderon's terrible. And you can say whatever you want about Delaney, but he's better than Calderon. So they don't like him at all. Portland and Golden State, CJ McCollum was pretty much unstoppable. 41 points on 57% shooting, 8 boards, 4 triples. He's got a really good record against Golden State. Not this level of good, but pretty good. And Dame Lillard had 34. So those 2 guys combined for 75 points. And I believe at halftime it was like 48 out of 58 that they'd scored. The Blazers went down 109-121, but it was a bit closer than that. It really did start to spread out towards the end of the third quarter. Dame was good, 34, 5 and 3 with 3 triples and 2 steals there. We didn't have Yusuf Nurkic play, but Terry Stotts says that Nurkic is going to play at some point in this series. We don't know if that's game 2. We don't know if it's a return at home in game 3 or 4, but he's going to play at some point in this series. There was a change to the starting lineup. I thought that what they would do against the Warriors is they wouldn't be able to run Myers Leonard at center, and that was accurate. They couldn't. They played him 7 minutes. So they did go with a Noah Vonleh lineup at center, but instead of putting Al-Farouq Aminu in to play at the 4, they went with Mo Harkless at the 4, and they put Evan Turner in at the 3, which is an interesting decision to me. Aminu was not great, and let's be honest, he had 5 boards and nothing else in 23 minutes, but it was a curious decision to start with both Turner and Harkless on the wing. Now, Evan Turner played well, 12, 10, and 4 in his 36 minutes, hit a couple of threes, which is very un-Evan Turner-like. But it was a surprise nonetheless. Well, Mo Harkless in 35 minutes had 11, 3, and 1 with 2 steals and a block. If Nurkic is out again in game 2, I think that they do again start Vonleh at center. Now, whether that means Turner and Harkless start, or Turner and Aminu, or Harkless and Aminu, I'm not sure, because Aminu has had some pretty decent success against the Warriors in the past, so I would think that this will be a low point for what Aminu can do, and it's probably going to be a high point for Evan Turner. But the Vonleh-Leonard situation, I think, is pretty much set now. I talk about weird rotations. The Blazers used Shabazz Napier for 10 minutes. That seems weird to me. Pat Connaughton played 4 minutes, and it wasn't junk time 4 minutes. Neither was Napier's 10. Those guys got in early, like way earlier. Like Connaughton was in at the start of the third quarter. Like just weird rotate. He only played 4 minutes. And Shabazz only played 10, but that's still 14 minutes that could have gone extra to Alan Crabb, who played just 22 minutes and was terrible. Granted, he had 3 points in 22. He was bad. But it just seems weird to get Connaughton and Napier in there when, again, for 75% of the year, they just didn't play at all. And they were pushed into action when guys were injured towards the end of the year. But it was still just a weird scenario to me to see that sort of extended rotation and change up in combinations of lineup combinations, which are things we just really haven't seen play out much at all. On the Warrior side of things, Draymond Green was fantastic. Some of his defensive work was amazing. The block shots were just ridiculous. Some of those, I think he blocked 3 dunks. That's just a crazy amount. He ended up almost with the triple-double, almost with the 5x5. He had 19, 12, and 9 with 3 steals and 5 blocks, and he hit 3 triples. Just an absolute monster of a game from Draymond. Steph had 29, 5, and 4, and Durant had 32 and 10. They're just back to business for those guys. And when I say back to business, it is, and it's back to business for Klay Thompson in that he produced the sort of numbers that he produces when Durant and Curry are healthy, and that's 15 points with 3 boards and a triple one. Like really, really muted in comparison to what he was doing when Durant was out, and that should be an expectation moving forward. Ian Clark was in the rotation ahead of Pat McCaw. He had 12 and 2 in 12 minutes. Loves playing the Blazers. Shot 80% from the field. But the fact that he was ahead of McCaw is something that will probably continue now that Durant is back. I think you're going to see Durant and Iguodala play basically all the minutes at small forward. So even if Matty Barnes returns for the next game, I'm not 100% convinced that Barnes actually plays or plays meaningful minutes. We had Zaza Pachulia, Dave West, and JaVale McGee all play minutes at the center, and that 3-man center rotation looks like it's something that will continue. McGee had a definite impact, while West and Pachulia just didn't really play much at all. 12 minutes for Pachulia and 13 for West. But obviously the majority of this value is concentrated in Curry, Durant, Green, to a lesser extent Clay, and it was not a good night from Iguodala. Even though he played 33 minutes, his production's not going to be the same as what we saw from him when Durant was out just a couple of weeks ago. Chicago and Boston, the Bulls get a victory. Just a real weird game. The Bulls win 106-102. They didn't actually play well, and that's the more confusing part. Jim Butler wasn't good until about the last, 5 minutes maybe. He didn't play well. Dwayne Wade didn't play well at all. Rajon Rondo had a good stat line, but he was an absolute stinker. He airballed 2 consecutive layups. He was turning it over. He was lost on defense, and they still got the victory. And it was because they were led by 2 big men. And one of those was Robin Lopez, who had 14 and 11 in 34 minutes, pulling down 8 offensive rebounds against a Celtics team that just is horrible rebounding the ball, and Lopez took full advantage of that. So expect him to be a decent force. And Bob Portis was the other one who went crazy. 29 minutes for Portis, 19 and 9 with 3 triples and 2 blocks. It's a huge performance. He was 8 of 10 from the field though, so remember that. It won't happen. He won't continue to shoot at that level. Now, he was active in other areas, but he won't start game 2, and in all likelihood, he'll just play his 20 minutes or so in that game. But this is the Hoiberg style. If someone's getting hot, they just play them extra, forget about rotations, forget about consistency. None of that stuff ever matters to Hoiberg, and that enabled Portis to get this huge extra run that he got here. But don't expect 80% shooting to continue and for him to be this guy that does this on a consistent basis. With Portis firing, obviously it's always tied to Nikola Mirotic struggling. He was 1 of 9, Mirotic 4 and 4 in 19 minutes. He does struggle when he has to play with Rondo, Wade and Butler, because basically every one of his shots was just a catch and shoot attempt. And that's just not how this guy thrives. And that's just what's going to happen when he's playing with Butler and when he's playing with Wade and when he's playing with Rondo. Again, in a lineup that we just never saw throughout the regular season. Here it is being trotted out as the starting unit in the playoffs. They started one game in the regular season, game 82. These 4 guys playing together, or 5, including Lopez. Mirotic was, again, it's just not his best option being a catch and shoot guy, but he'll be better than this. Portis will be worse than this, and it will be a weird back and forth situation. The Bulls went with a 9-man rotation. Jaren Grant got 21 minutes, and Paulie Zipser played 22, while Chris Felicio had 14, and we saw Michael Carter-Williams out of the rotation, which is what I imagine will continue to happen. Jim Butler scored 30 and Wade had 11, 5 and 6 with a pair of steals and a pair of blocks. So good defensive numbers there from Wade. For Boston, Isaiah Thomas obviously played through the grief of losing his sister. It wasn't 100% sure that was going to happen, and he might not play in game 2 because he will have his sister's funeral to attend to. So he's not sure whether he will be attending that or playing in the game. He was clearly upset. We saw all the footage of him crying in warm-ups. We saw the footage of him crying during the tribute to his sister on the screen and when he was announced in starting lineups. Apparently that made Charles Barkley feel uncomfortable. He's just an idiot, Barkley, honestly. Now, Thomas was great. He was a little shaky early on, but he was fantastic. 33, 5 and 6 on 56% shooting. He wasn't the reason they lost. Neither was Al Horford, contrary to popular opinion. He had 19, 7 and 8. His passing was amazing. 8 assists led the team. Yeah, he didn't grab a rebound for about the last half and was bullied there, but he did a lot of other good things. Rebounding has never been his strength. He is not a good rebounder. We're well aware of that for Al Horford, and it did rear its head here, but he wasn't the reason they lost. Avery Bradley got back to some of his better form, 14, 3 and 2 with 4 triples and 3 steals. But there was just very little contribution from other guys. Jay Crowder was off, 9 points on 12 shots. Amir Johnson did what he does, and that's usually nothing, while Kelly Olynyk had 7 and 4 with 2 steals and 3 blocks. It still continues to amaze me that Olynyk just doesn't play more than this. He wasn't dreadful here. He did some good things. He did struggle at times, but no more than the 4 minutes of Jonas Jerebko or the 3 minutes of Tyler Zeller or the 18 minutes of Amir Johnson, to be honest. He didn't do anything special in that playing time either. Brad Stevens used an 11-man rotation. He used 9 guys in the first half, and then just changed things up again and threw Jonas Jerebko and Gerald Green in there in the second half. I don't need 6 minutes of Gerald Green or 4 of Jerebko or 3 of Zeller. There's just no point for this shit, and it ended up not working for Boston. Okay, they were trying to find answers, but you don't find answers in Tyler Zeller or Jonas Jerebko. Your better players are Thomas Horford, Bradley Smart, Olynyk, Crowder, Johnson. They're you guys. Jaylen Brown only saw 11 minutes, had 5 points, and didn't miss a shot. But we had to get 6 minutes of Gerald Green in there. That's overthinking it to me, especially in the playoffs. Give your better players more minutes. And Green provided nothing in his time on the court, and I'm sure that doesn't shock anybody. So it'll be interesting to see what they do moving forward. Marcus Smart, again, couldn't shoot, but hit a couple of key threes late, had 6 assists. He did sort of what he needs to do, and he's going to consistently be on the court and play plus 30 minutes. Let's go on to the last game. It was OKC in Houston. It was an annihilation. The Rockets won 118-87. Russ had 22, 11, and 7 with 3 triples and 2 steals, but shot at a horrendous 26%. Patrick Beverley was all over him. He probably outplayed him, to be honest, Beverly. It was not a good Westbrook night. Was Andre Robertson. Let's not expect too much of this from Robertson. 18 points on 70% shooting with 4 triples, 7 boards, 2 steals, and 3 blocks. He was great one-on-one with Harden. Harden ended up getting the better of him, but he was great, had some good blocks. And I talked about it yesterday, that Robertson does very well against Houston. He can put up fantasy points in a much higher clip than what we've seen from him against pretty much all other opposition. He was nailing these wide open threes, and it just doesn't happen often enough for Robertson. But it is going to be something, because he's going to play big minutes. There's no doubt about that, because he's going to be matching up with Harden the whole time, basically. So don't think that we're going to be having situations where they can't play Robertson. They're playing 25 minutes. He's going to match with Harden, and you're going to get 35. And occasionally he'll have nights like this, but this is clearly upper echelon stuff. I don't understand Billy Donovan's complete reluctance to play Victor Oladipo as a point guard. Oladipo played 55 minutes as a point guard this year. That is ludicrously low, especially when your other options are Samaje Christon, Backwards James, and Norris Cole. And inexplicably, both of these guys played in this game. 6 minutes of Norris Cole for a 6 trillion. He is terrible. He should not be seeing the court in a playoff game. And it wasn't junk time for him. Christon played 14 minutes and had 5, 2, and 2. The easy answer is Victor. It's like what Portland does, or what they usually do, apart from when they played Napier today. CJ and Dame. Dame goes off, CJ becomes point guard. Crabbe comes in at the 2. CJ goes off, Dame comes back in. That's what you do here. Russ and Victor. Russ goes off, Victor comes across to the point guard. Abrines comes in at the 2. McDermott comes in at the 2. Whoever comes in at the 2. Just not Norris Cole or Samaje Christon, who were probably the 2 worst players in the entire NBA to actually have gotten minutes over this playoff weekend. Domantas Sabonis played 4 minutes. Granted, that was a little bit of junk time, same as Doug McDermott's 3. They just weren't in the game earlier on. Enes Kanter's going to struggle in this matchup, 8 and 3 in 16 minutes. Don't be surprised if this is actually a series high in terms of playing time for him. He is not going to be a great option, while Steve Adams struggled. And we had Jeremy Grant play 10 and 5. I am not convinced that Jeremy Grant is an NBA quality player, and I think we're going to see that play out across the course of these playoffs. Vic Oladipo wasn't a good night for him. 1 of 12 shooting. Still played the 32 minutes and brought it defensively, which has been something I've been critical of him. A steal and 2 blocks with 3 assists. Just the shot didn't fall for Vic, so it's not a reason to completely back off there. And of course, Taj Gibson only played 21 minutes. For what reason? I have literally no idea. He needs to be playing more than that. On to the Rockets. Jim had 37, 7, and 9, 3 threes, 3 steals, really got the better of Robertson in the end, and he had been a guy that had really shut Harden down. It clearly didn't happen here, but Patrick Beverley is probably the story for Houston. 21 and 10 for Beverley, 4 triples, 3 assists, 2 steals. A huge night for Beverley. He also got absolutely laid out by Steven Adams on a screen. Just crunched, got back up, no fuss. He got hit hard though. Not quite as hard as what, say, Steven Adams' hits may have been used to back up growing up in New Zealand playing rugby, considering Adams wasn't moving. But Jesus, Beverley got absolutely smashed. The Rockets, they said they ran that tight rotation. We saw Bobby Brown, Troy Williams, and the table Montrezl Harrell get in late, but that was just junk time stuff for those guys. Clint Capella, he was fantastic, 14 and 7 with a steal and 2 blocks in 25 minutes, while Nene played 19 and had 15 and 5. Both of those guys are going to have value in this series. Capella was super impressive here. Ryan Anderson was not. He had 4 points with 12 rebounds. That is the risky run with Anderson. I just don't think he's that good, but he did attack the boards more than he normally does, so that's a benefit, I guess. Well, Eric Gordon was bad. Lou Williams was bad. He was 11 points on 11 shots, and Trevor Ariza was bad. So the Rockets smoked them with bad performances from Gordon, Ariza, and Lou Williams. And you have to think that at least one of those guys, if not 2, can pick the play up in the next time out. All right, that is all the action from Sunday. Lots of comments coming in from you guys. John says, why doesn't Donovan play Oladipo at point guard? I have absolutely no idea. No idea, John. I can't answer that. And Hunter Blansett says, OKC's front court is garbage. Confirmed. Need Gibson. Yeah, they do. They've got him. That's the thing. They've got him there. They can play him. There's no need for Sabonis to play. You just play 28 minutes of Gibson. It's hard. I like Cantor a lot. This is a terrible, terrible matchup for him. So he should not be playing any more than 15 minutes, it feels to me, in this sort of a matchup. And Yeah, Donovan's got a few things to think about, but we don't need Norris Cole in the second quarter. We don't need Samaje Cristén playing double digits in minutes. In fact, we don't need them playing a single minute at all. If you're fighting for your life in the playoffs, metaphorically, yeah, Kristen's not the guy to save you. He did bank in a 3 today for his only points. Clearly didn't mean that. He's just got no idea. So there's no reason for him to be out there and doing what he is doing. Let's talk about the games for Monday. There are only 2 games on Monday, so this is a nightmare slate, and this is going to be the weigh-in playoff, so just be careful. Now, some of the time, FanDuel and DraftKings, when they have these 2-game slates, they'll combine it and make it a Monday-Tuesday combination. They're not doing that. So, unless something changes after I've recorded this, at this stage, they're not doing it. It's 2 games. So we've got Indiana-Cleveland, and we've got Memphis-San Antonio. Now, I'm not going to do picks of the day at the end, because pretty much every player is going to be looked at or available. You're talking about 40 players who are going to see the court. You're talking about probably 20 guys that are going to see big minutes. So every guy comes into calculations here, and it's going to be about hitting the right value play and getting the right stud. So there's a lot more luck associated with these 2-game slates than say 4 or a 6 or an 8, as I've talked about plenty of times before. Let's talk about these games, though. Cleveland and Indiana. The Cavs are favored by 7.5, and the total is 210. That's a massive difference compared to the second game, which because it has a total of 189. So a lot of the value is going to be concentrated in this Cavs-Pacers game. We don't know if Al Jefferson or the little dog Glenn Robinson III will be ready to go. They're both listed as questionable. If Jefferson plays, I don't think that he will even get into the rotation. And to be honest, I'm not sure where Glenn Robinson III fits in. Does he take the minutes of CJ Miles? Does he take Lance Stevenson's? I can't see him taking either of those guys playing time. Does he take Aaron Brooks? And they run Monte exclusively at point guard in their second unit. That's a possibility, but I'm not sure how Robinson fits in here. So it'd be interesting to see exactly how they do run that. Interestingly for Cleveland, Iman Shumpert was a DNP CD in the last game. So are they going to just remove him and run Darren, Kyrie, Kyle, and JR as the 4 guards? That's the way it appears at the moment, I guess. At point guard, Jeff Teague.
My name is Jeff.
He is at 6,700. Didn't have the best of times in the first game out, but it is still a positive matchup for Teague. He had 22 points in that first matchup against Kyrie and the Cavs, but as I said, it is a positive matchup for him here, so I don't think he's a write-off. At 73 on DraftKings, he definitely moves down the pecking order of guys that I'd be interested in. Kyrie at 8,700 on FanDuel or 8,000 on DraftKings. I like him a lot on DraftKings. He dropped 41 in the first game. You think he's almost a lock for 40 points with DraftKings scoring. Maybe not so much on FanDuel, but he needs a lot more than 40 on FanDuel at 8,700 to bring in the value. So I like what Kyrie's price brings you over on DraftKings. He's a safer play over there. Guys like Darren Williams and Aaron Brooks, there's not much for us to care about there. Now, J.R. Smith is almost a minimum salary player on FanDuel. He's at 36. He's at 38 on DraftKings. He was brutal in the first game. He is not a guy that I would feel great about relying upon in cash. But in tournaments, if the 3s start going down, then he's going to put that value up. And if he hits 5 threes or 6 threes and you get your 26 points, then it's a pretty good return. But from what we've been seeing from him, it's just been putridness after putridness. And putridness just doesn't sound like the right word to me. I don't think that's the word. I think it is the word, but it should be putridity. But I'm sure that's not actually a real word. As for Monte Ellis, there's no way. No, 4,000 for Monte. We saw at the end of the regular, there's 2 ways all this stuff can go. At the end of the regular season, Monte was having his minutes cut for Lance, and that could be a trend that continued into the playoffs, which is what happened. But in Washington, we saw Otto Porter have his minutes cut for Kelly Oubre, and that trend disappeared. So it is really hard to get an idea of how these April, late March trends continue, because there's clearly 2 ways they can go, and there's never a set pattern. So Lance just continued to play those minutes and got extra actually in the playoffs. And in Washington, Oubre went from 29, 28 minutes down to 18. Yeah, a big difference in how they were running things. Lance is the guy you want here at 4,700. It's a big jump in his price tag on FanDuel. So that takes a little bit of the shine off. But on DraftKings, he's still at 4,000. That to me is the cash wing player that you want now. He's not a shooting guard over on DraftKings. He's a small forward, but he's still got some pretty high level value over there at that sort of a price. Kyle Korver, yeah, at 3,200, there is upside there. If you don't want to take a J.R. Smith, if Corver gets hot, that can happen. But in general, the minutes ratio is going to be like 1.5 to 1 at least, if not 2 to 1, between Smith and Corver. So odds favour Smith being that guy who can go off. LeBron's at 11,500. He had 62 in the first game. No reason to me to think that having LeBron at that price is a bad option. 11.3 on DraftKings, no problem. Paulie George at 9,900. That's maybe pushing it a little bit. George had a good game in the first one, put up 44, which is not quite there at 99. He's at 10.4 on DraftKings, so that's a lot scarier. That sort of a price tag, and I would be taking LeBron over that every day of the week. But at 9.9 on FanDuel, there is a little bit of something there in it. While CJ Miles at 3,000, we can see that FanDuel's actually dropped their minimum salary now because CJ Miles is under that 3,500 price tag now. So he's a below minimum salary player. So at $3,000 for CJ, he is someone that moves into that J.R. Smith GPP pool of players. I don't think we need to care too much about Dick Jefferson. At power forward, Thaddeus Young, 4,800. Didn't do much in the first game. Still had 23 points, and at 4,800, that's almost where it needs to be. So I still think that he is a fairly strong player, especially with a $400 price dip, and he can be the guy that maybe enables you to put LeBron and Paul George into the same lineup. So I think you should be looking at Thad at 56 on DraftKings. I wouldn't. I don't really like that for him over there. As for Kevin Love at 7,900, we saw his minutes limited, and that feels just like it's too high of a price for me. Channing Frye at 3,700 for Channing. I'm not really seeing too much there. And Kevin Seraphin and Lavoy Allen playing the backup minutes in Indiana in the front court. I don't really see much with those guys either. At center, Tristan Thompson's at 4,700. 24 points in the first game, 4,700. That's a tick. It's not a big tick and it's not a tournament upside tick, but it's a solid cash return. And I imagine that Thompson can get close to 25 in most of these games. He didn't play a shit ton of minutes. He only played, what did he play, 31? It's not a massive amount. If he plays 37 or 38, then 27, 28 points is not a complete dream sort of scenario for Thompson. He can get more than that. So I think that he's a pretty strong option there. As for Miles Turner at 6,700, he put up 31 in the first game. Wasn't great at it. 6,400 on DraftKings. He is all right, but it's definitely nothing that's standing out to me to being spectacular or anything like that. Let's go on to the second game now, which has the propensity to be disgustingly ugly, and that is Memphis at San Antonio. The first one of those was ugly. It was disgusting. It was bad. You can talk about how bad the Eastern Conference is, but two Western Conference playoff matchups, like 30-point blowouts. Bucks Raptors was good. Cavs Pacers was good. Celtics Bulls was good in terms of close matches. Some of the play in the Bulls match wasn't all that good. Atlanta Washington was actually pretty close as well. But two absolute destructions over in the Western Conference. The Spurs by 11, the total 189 is just not appealing at all. We've got no Tone Allen. He is out of this game. So do they go back to Wayne Selden? It appears that they will, and he really challenges Samaje Cristen and Norris Cole for worst players playing minutes in the playoffs. Let's start with the point guards. 7,200 for Mick Conley. He wasn't at his best in the first game, and still put up 36 points. It's going to be him and it's going to be Gasol that are going to have to lead them to any sort of respectability. So I don't have any problem with using Conley here. You know, using Conley over Kyrie on FanDuel I think is a pretty good option. Now on DraftKings it's not so much because Conley comes in at 7,200 as opposed to Kyrie's 8,000. So it's not as big of a gap, but he is still a really strong play on DraftKings, Conley. So I've got no problem with using him over there on both sites. Pat Mills at 3,600, I don't really enjoy that. I think that if you're taking a punt on a Spurs point guard, it's going to be Tone Parker, but they have bumped him to 44 on FanDuel, so that does take away a lot of the value, and 42 on DraftKings is probably a bit high. But like I talked about 2-to-1 ratios before, I think it's a 2-to-1 ratio of Parker getting more minutes than Mills most of the time, and that's going to mean 2-to-1 ratio of him outperforming him. Regardless of who you think is the better point guard at this point, it doesn't really matter, because if Parker gets 27 minutes 3 out of 4 games and 20 in another one, then that's the angle you want to go on. But the price doesn't necessarily suit him. Wayne Selden on FanDuel, they've gone hard and they've gone, this guy's terrible. We're going to bump him down to 2,500, and fair enough. But, and this is a discussion I had yesterday, and I don't remember who it was with that I was that I was talking about this value of these players at this cheaper price. But at 2,500 for Wayne Selden, he had a terrible game. Put up 11 points. At 2,500, if you get 11 points, that's not far off where he needs to be. That's not far off at all. He gets 12.5 points, that's 5x value. So he is not far off that. I wouldn't feel great about it because he's bad. And I don't think he's had a single good game at all in his NBA career. But at that price, he only has to have a below average game to actually return that sort of value. So don't discount Wayne Selden, as dumb as it sounds. Now, Dan Green had a huge game. Blocks out of his ass, steals everywhere. It resulted in 19 points. So it wasn't this big... It was great. He was absolutely fantastic for the Spurs, but it didn't translate into great DFS numbers. So even though he is at 3,800, even though he played fantastically, I'm not interested. But on DraftKings at 3,300, I am interested. 3,300, he gets the 20 that he had in the last game, then it is real value. So it's the increased value of his stats in the scoring system on DraftKings, plus the much lower salary that turns his value ratio really towards his favor. So he becomes a solid play over there. Troy Daniels, Manu, Andy Harrison, I don't see much with those guys. You might have a look at Troy Daniels. If the Grizz are going to get hot and hit some threes, it's going to be him. He's at 2,900, but he played only 16 minutes in that first game and had -1 points. There is no way you can trust that in cash, but at 2,900, there's a little bit there, but really not much. And same as Andy Harrison at 3,000, who played 20 minutes, which really should never happen on a playoff team. Vincy Carter's at 3,000. FanDuel's knocked him down to a below minimum price. So that's useful here for Vince. He is going to play the 30 minutes if the game stays close, and he has definitely got the value to go above there. So he is, if you're looking at Troy Daniels or Jim Ennis or Andy Harrison or Wayne Selden, Carter's the guy that you take out of that group at that $3,000 price tag, definitely to me. I didn't even talk about Selden over on DraftKings. He's at $2,000 on DraftKings. That's really good value. Again, he gets 12 there at 6x, and you're home. And he had 12 in the last game, and he averages 13 over the last 5. So I actually like Selden at 2,000. Get your George and LeBron lineups going. Put Kawhi in as a utility, and get that value put in from Selden. And Vincy Carter's at 34, so there is some value there for him as well over on DraftKings. As for Kawhi, 8,700 for Kawhi. He had 45 in the first game, only played 32 minutes. If you don't want to take Paul George, which is totally understandable, and go a LeBron-Kawhi situation, absolutely I understand that, and I think Kawhi is a much better option than Paul George. It's $1,200 cheaper to get Leonard than it is to get Paul George, and I think it's $1,600 less on DraftKings. It's a huge, huge difference, and Kawhi is a better player. So we'll see how that all pans out. Kyle Anderson, Jim Ennis. Ennis is the guy that you might take a punt on it. He's at 3,200 on FanDuel. He's at 28 on DraftKings. If they decide that, you know what, maybe Selden is not the answer, maybe it can be Ennis, then that works out as a GPP, but I don't have strong feelings about that. LaMarcus Aldridge, 6,500. He dropped 30 in 30 minutes in the last game. Point per minute production at 6,500. If the game stays relatively close, he'll eclipse that, and he will have better games than what he had on Saturday as well. So I don't think that he is someone to be totally discounted at that sort of a price. JaMychal Green at minimum salary. He did nothing, but he will be better. I still don't really... Or not, he's not minimum anymore, sorry. He's at 3,500. I'm not really sure. There's a little bit of upside there for Green, but I don't like JaMychal Green as a fantasy contributor. Zebo was horrendous. He is at 5,300. I'm happy to go back to the well on Zach Randolph. He won't be anywhere near as bad as what he was in that first game. At 5,300, I feel okay about going back to him. 51 on DraftKings, but I might chicken out a little bit in terms of using him in cash, but he shouldn't be completely written off, although many of you will, or many people playing DFS, never again, never again. He killed me last time, which again is an attitude that you just need to get rid of. At center, Marc Gasol, 7,600. Kept the Grizzlies in the game in the last one. Dropped 44. Yeah, it is a price rise for Gasol, but it's not on DraftKings at 7,000. So I love it on DraftKings. More ambivalent on FanDuel, but he's still worth a look. While Powell at 5,000, I don't really think that Powell at 5,000 has a massive amount of appeal. He's at 49 on DraftKings, so that's getting interesting. But I'd only look at Powell as a tournament type of guy, while the Undertaker, Dwayne Dedman, at $3,000, I just don't really see it for Deadman at the moment. 3,500 on FanDuel. I'm not really seeing that from him. All right, so that is your 2-game slate. Don't forget, subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play or TuneIn. You can do that at all those places where you find podcasts. As I said, I'm not doing the picks of the day today because I just told you, everyone, that this is the way that these 2-game slates go. And for most of the playoffs, there won't be picks of the day because all the information is contained in those breakdowns of the games. And there's no point when there's probably 20 guys to pick from, me singling out 15 guys as players of the day. Like, what's the point of that? So that's the way that we're going to do it here moving forward. Follow me on Twitter at redrock_bball, Instagram at the same, and Facebook.com/redrockbasketball. Check out Basketball Monster if you want some DFS projections. We're doing that all through the playoffs, so go and check us out over there. And of course, the rest of the Locked On Podcast Network. If you want to hear Fred Katz talk about why the hell Samaje Kristen and Norris Cole are playing, go and check out Locked On Thunder. If you want to hear Sean and Cody talk about the Bulls Game 1 upset victory and what that means for the rest of the series, spoiler alert, nothing, go and listen to Locked On Bulls. If you want to hear Jay and John talk about the Celtics loss and the Isaiah Thomas situation, Locked On Celtics is the one for you. So check out the rest of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.